Paul, thanks for coming down tonight.
My pleasure.
At a moment's notice, Paul Neff appears, ever ready to discourse on tobacco and other matters on the smoking section with Stephen Helfer. Paul, you enjoyed the party the other night.
Yeah, that was a great party.
And I think, do you think we should keep the location secret, or do you think we should mention it on the air? Because,
I think it'd be a good idea to put in a plug for the place because they need new members, and
All right, why don't you put in a plug?
Well, we celebrated Steve's birthday at the Somerville City Club on Inner Belt Road in Somerville. They have karaoke. We both got up and sang. Did our best to sound like and look like country singers.
Now, Paul, it seemed to me that the people there, and I think it is related to smoking, are related to the fact that there are fewer restrictions on them, seem much more relaxed than in most nightclubs these days, where people, even those people who don't smoke, know that there is this restriction.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a place where you don't feel the presence of the state so much, and people feel free to improvise and interact with the performers. People in the audience have their own routines that they do, and people mingle. And so, yeah, it's adults acting almost like children.
Yeah, and but I do think, and other people have noted this, that nightlife is not what it was when people were free to either smoke or not smoke.
Yeah, I didn't expect it would be.
You expected with these smoking bans and whatnot that would have a change on nightlife.
Yes, and I don't think anybody's very happy about it. I mean, a lot of non-smokers have come up and said that, they prefer the ambiance of the place where smoking is allowed. Well, probably largely for that reason. It feels more free.
Yes, even if they don't smoke, it feels like the presence of the state has not intruded to the degree that it has.
And you are free to be intelligent on your own, and it's more theatrical, more live. It's almost like being in a movie. It is like being in a certain
amount of romance.
I mean, movies have smoke rising. It's actually visually attractive. I think probably most people would admit that.
Well,
that at least sometimes it's visually.
Well, what about those people who chirp, "Oh, well, now when I go out to a bar, my clothes don't smell like smoke"? What about
I've read those interviews in the newspaper, but I've never had a conversation like that.
Yeah.
With people I respect, people I'm friends with.
What about people you don't respect or not friends with? Have you ever heard them say that?
I've only heard it through the media, to tell you the truth.
Right.
Maybe once or twice when it was a new concept. Ooh, my clothes smell like smoke. But usually it's your clothes smell like smoke. Have you been smoking?
Right.
Right? It didn't ever strike me as a grassroots thing. A bunch of my coworkers, in fact, were interviewed. They were on the cover, I think, of Cambridge Chronicle on the impending bans.
And this is, we're talking 15 years ago, right?
Yes, and they were sitting at a bar, and these were like four friends of mine. A couple were smokers, a couple were non-smokers.
Right.
And they were not happy with it.
Right. Well, it's funny because I remember, my father would ride, he quit smoking, unfortunately, early, relatively early. Both my parents smoked.
Well, I mean, whatever makes him happy.
Well, I don't know if it made him happy. It certainly made him gain weight.
Uh-huh.
And I remember my sister saying to me when we were children that when my parents quit smoking, they both became more irritable.
Uh-huh.
But he would take to train up. We lived in a suburb of New York, Scarsdale, and he would take the train up, and sometimes he would sit in the smoking car.
Yeah.
Even though he was a non-smoker, just if the train was filled. But then my mother would.
And what was it about it that he liked?
Well, that it had a seat. You know, in other words, the other seats were crowded.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't because of the smoke?
No, he didn't,
But I
he wasn't
mean,
going in there for the smoke.
Yeah.
But my mother would complain that he smelled of smoke when he came home.
And what year was this about?
Oh, this was probably in the early 60s. I mean, she didn't complain
Oh, okay.
vociferously. She
Okay.
just noticed that he would sit in the smoking car sometimes if that was the only place where a seat was available.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, it was funny because this was, you know, in these kind of what you call, I guess, bedroom communities, whereby, for the most part, all the men would go into New York to work, and the women, in those days, really didn't work very much, at least not,
Right.
in my income bracket, or my parents' income bracket. And I don't know where I'm going with this now, but...
I was just reading a book on that very
no,
subject.
No, you know, and you know what happened? And on the smoking car, they would have someone selling drinks.
Okay.
So a lot of the men, it was mostly men, but there were women there too. Not, it wasn't exclusively men. On their way home from work, would be in the smoking car, and they would be drinking.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was like, to a lot of people, this was the best part of their day.
I imagine so.
And of course, they banned smoking, and now they have banned drinking. So
Oh, really?
these cars
They've
don't
banned drinking
exist
too?
on these commuter trains that go from the New York suburbs to New York
Yeah.
City.
Yeah.
They don't even have the drinking car. And the drinking car, the guy who sold the drinks, you know, he'd like, it was always a man. I think it might have often been a black man, I don't know, but he would always have, I don't know, he had a little wagon. It was really something. And, you know, it was just a lot of fun, I think.
It was more fun.
It was a little before my time. I never got a chance to,
Things were a lot more fun without this creeping statism
right,
at every level.
right. But,
Yeah, keep going.
yeah, so the state is, the health state particularly.
Well, you know, I just read a book, very controversial position that he takes.
Yes.
That the sexual revolution and feminism have actually made things worse for the average man and woman.
And who is the author of this
The
book?
author is a guy named F. Roger Devlin,
Yes.
very good writer. But his main point, or what keeps coming up, I should say, is that in these two concurrent revolutions, first there was the anarchy phase, the licentious phase.
You mean free love?
Free love and,
Right.
and the fun side of feminism. But as got into the 70s and 80s, it got to the authoritarian phase, the statist phase, you know.
Right.
They felt that it was now, they were far enough along on the long march through the institutions that statism was a good thing for
Well,
them.
how do you
And they began to penalize, come up first of all with terms that had never been heard in human history before, like date rape.
Right.
And these were like very vague concepts.
Well, I mean, for example-
and so very easy to prosecute.
Right. Well, because if you have laws that are vague, you know, then it's very easy to. How do you know if you're breaking the law, of not breaking the law, and but how do you think this kind of idea of the creeping state fits in? Why is it that tobacco, and this is the question, the perennial question that we come up with it? Why
Right.
is tobacco apparently so integral to the march of the
right.
state in its intrusiveness? Let's say.
Here's my latest theory.
Okay.
It's a hard front to defend.
Oh, the tobacco issue.
Right. People have always felt a little guilty or very guilty about smoking, and that it's an adult thing. It's sort of people are ambivalent about it.
Well, right, but
You know,
why?
people do it, but it's not something easily.
That still does not tell
They
me.
have that. No one has thought to verbalize a defense for it.
Well, they have, but they've been few.
And that's what we're trying to do. But since they haven't, it's a very opportune front for statism to attack.
The kind of but particularly the health
increase their
state,
power.
the health state, the idea.
Yeah, it's all part of the same.
That the sole reason for living is to see how long you can live.
And right.
How much risk you can avoid in every way possible, and that if you don't want to do it out of your own, the state will enforce it either because they want to save supposed medical costs associated with it, or they want to protect the children from your bad example, let's say.
Right. And, concurrently with that, the state made advances in, policing the dormitories, the bedrooms.
You mean in terms of sexuality?
Sexual harassment, which is very hard to defend.
If you're, in other words, if you're accused of sexual harassment.
Right. The author boils it down to this: sexual harassment is when a woman when an unattractive man comes onto a woman, an undesired man.
Right. Now, is the author of this book, is this a recent book that you're talking about?
It's a bunch of essays that have come out since around 2000.
By this particular individual?
Yeah, and the book came out last year.
Let me ask you, okay, so we have a state, we have a lot of things going on. I mean, some people, view a lot of, certainly in terms of marijuana, it seems like we're going to have legalized marijuana in Massachusetts, whereby anybody who wants to smoke marijuana can smoke marijuana if they're 21 years old or older. So that is certainly a liberalization in terms of marijuana, right? So that's kind of inconsistent with your...
Yeah, it is. I guess it's not that important to them, or
why
not
would
that beneficial to extending their power. Maybe it's a concession to look like they're liberal toward the public, because they're really not. I mean, the state is totally disdainful of our opinions, and it's intellectually dishonorable.
Right.
One thing the writer says near the end of the book that I thought was very relevant to what we're doing. He says he hates it. He refuses the label male or men's rights advocate.
Yes.
He says, if anything, he'd call himself a women's duties activist. Right?
Oh, okay.
Because he goes into how the women's liberation and the sexual revolution promised people a certain level of pleasure, kind of a hedonistic life without any mention of responsibilities that go with it.
Well, certainly the anti-tobacco movement is kind of an anti-pleasure.
Right.
That's an anti-pleasure movement, I would say, because, in other words, the idea that you can derive pleasure from smoking is considered to be not even an argument.
Right, and what Roger Devlin argues is that in the sex department, most men and women are not happy either.
Well,
and they're not having pleasure.
Is this man? Is he? How old is he? Is he? I've never heard of him.
I think he's about my age.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I just showed you Chronicles last week.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Yeah.
And you were probably reading some of those writers for the first time. He's with that set.
Now you tend to be a bit of an optimist. So, for example, when our most popular city councilor, it seems that in terms of his re-election, I think he got more votes than anybody else, Nadeem Mazen.
Yeah.
He seems to think that, and I think it's understandable he would think so, because the rate of smoking is declining, and teenage smoking is at its lowest it's ever been.
Well, okay, you know what I always...
Right, so I'm just curious, and he thinks it's reasonable to prophesy, let's say, that in 50 years nobody will be smoking. Now, you want to counter that with him when he's on our program,
sure
which will be
do.
August 17, we hope.
Yeah, I do.
And what will you counter? How will you counter that?
Well, first of all, I want to add his attitude is a perfect example of the effects of statism that elected officials have such disdain for being credible. You know, they don't debate on things. You
Well,
know,
I mean,
we've never known them to
You're saying that
debate.
anybody who's elected is going to be disdainful of the people who
Not
elected them?
necessarily. They could be relatively anti-statist.
Right.
I think it's probably correct to talk about socially liberal, fiscally conservative, kind of a neoconservative and neoliberal mainstream.
Well, it's interesting because last week Emily interviewed and I interviewed Felicia Nimue.
Yeah.
Nimue, and she said the nanny state is not liberal. She identifies as a liberal, but she says the nanny state, which attacks fat people and
Yeah.
attacks
No, I wouldn't call it
smokers.
liberal either. I would call it neoliberal. There's a
Oh, it's a
difference.
neoliberal,
It is not
yes.
classic liberalism. In fact, neoliberalism is statism.
Okay,
You
right.
know.
In other words, everything goes with the state, and we look for them to. Well, that's interesting.
And neoconservatism is the same to a lesser extent.
Well, that's interesting because right now the Public Health Department in Worcester is considering a ban on all outdoor areas of restaurants.
Well, here's my point, Steve.
Yes.
These city councils and these boards are going with this agenda with no evidence of popular support. And that's the point that I'm making, is that they're so accustomed to their power and the idea of increasing their power being their main goal, that they don't feel that being intellectually dishonorable is a big risk. They don't feel like they have to do their homework.
Well, right, but that, of course, that depends on the electorate, you know. and the
Well,
people
what
who elect
I
them.
wanted to say is, and they've allowed themselves to like get so disconnected from ordinary people that to give you one example,
Yeah.
Trump came out of nowhere and blindsided everybody and just kept coming despite all these coordinated efforts to,
Right.
to make him look bad. And the longer he lasted, the better he looked. And so people are reading their own agendas into what he says. And actually, a lot of what he says is, you know, is good, is reasonable. But anyways,
Yeah.
the point is this: his power comes from the fact that the statists practically handed it to him by being so arrogant that they don't like walk around and look and listen to people. I mean, in Harvard Square, you can see young people, old people, people all ages smoking and socializing with people who are not smoking.
Right.
And this thing of shaming smokers, I don't see that anymore.
You don't?
I have not seen examples of it
Okay,
for quite
well-
some time.
Well, you know, anyway, this thing that's going on in Worcester is, you know, is kind of down to a non-philosophical level. And it seems that there is some, you know, the Board of Health, at least for the moment, is not going to ban.
Okay.
And which is good. It seems like there are not only restaurateurs who are fighting it, but there are some people who don't have a financial interest in, you know, saying it's my business and it's going to hurt my business, but just freedom.
Right.
So this is and even there's some people, it seems to me, on the Board of Health who are questioning.
That's
whether-
excellent.
So it's some
You know,
good news.
I don't believe in any kind of demon theory. You know, I think a lot of these people are just afraid to say what they really think or think through what they've begun to feel. But now that people are chipping away at it, I think it's going to go surprisingly fast.
Now, do you think, Mike, a question that I have is I'd like to get in touch with some of the people that I saw mentioned in this article, which appeared on Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights Facebook page.
Okay.
Which really keeps us up to date on a lot of things that are going on in the world of tobacco and anti-tobacco. The question is, if we went out there, do you think we would have a good impact, or, you know, do you think we should, you know, meaning that we are not from Worcester. We're not
Yeah.
Worcesterites. So,
Yeah.
people say, well, we're outside agitators. That's always a...
I couldn't give you an answer on that one, because I've never been to one of these out-of-town things. Except,
you haven't gone to
no
the
further
out-of-town?
than Somerville and Boston.
Right. Well, that's out of town. That's out of town.
Yeah, well, those were just a little hop, and they were good.
Worcester's about 60 minutes from here.
Yeah.
And I
don't
hope we
know.
can get in touch with them and see what's going to go on there. And we also had a very interesting post on our Facebook page where this guy in Virginia, I think it was, Fairfax, Virginia, he was hosing down his car about to clean it, and he had a cigarette in his mouth.
Yeah.
He's hosing down the car with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and a guy comes up to him, I think two guys come up to him with a gun. No, I'm serious. And they say, give me your money and give me the car keys. And he takes the hose and hoses them down right in their faces. And the cigarette's still hanging out of his mouth.
Wow.
And he had a...
Cool guy.
What he had, right. He had a camera on, a lot of people have cameras on their dashboard now. Like what they call, I think, webcams. So he has this all on a video. Oh, and we have it up on our Facebook page. Now, do you think that because he was... Oh, we have a telephone call. Let's see what we got. Oh, no, here we go. You're on the smoking section.
Hey, Steve, I think that thing was staged.
You really do?
With the cigarette hanging out of his mouth and spraying. I think that guy did it just for attention.
You think so?
Kept the guy got to look like he was getting rough. People do that.
They do things like that, yeah.
People,
They make films like
there's
that.
strange people out there.
Yeah.
I remember one time there was somebody throwing acid in people's faces.
Yeah.
And a girl actually did it to herself.
Ooh.
Oh.
She put glasses on and threw acid in her face.
Well, Jim, let me ask you a
For
question.
attention.
Have you seen the video?
Yes.
You have seen the video?
Yes, I've seen it over and over.
Really?
Yeah, it's staged.
Does it look staged to you?
It does to me. It does.
Really?
It does. You'll find out later on that was staged.
Do you think it was staged?
Stayed away.
Do you think it was staged by the tobacco companies or by Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights?
It was staged by the guy who
Yeah, definitely by it.
I mean, how can you hold a cigarette?
Which tells you one thing.
The whole time that you're fighting off a guy with a gun.
Right, and so, yeah, it was staged, it had nothing to do
But we
with-
don't know that.
Well, I believe that. From the sound of it, it sounds like it was
You don't know
staged.
that, but you will find
Here's the
out.
point.
But let Paul speak. Jimmy, let Paul speak.
See, smoking has not become so denormalized that people don't think of using a cigarette for a prop.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. So we're still smoking. Jim, do you still let people smoke in your house?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Jim, we got 10 seconds left. Thanks for calling in. And I got to take a look at the video. I got to take a look at that video. I think